Ukraine cannot simply give up its territories as part of a peace settlement with Russia, because this would contradict its legislation, the position of society, and the actual situation on the ground. President Volodymyr Zelensky stated this in an interview with Fox News. According to him, the issue of territories is the most difficult in the negotiations and remains the only point where the positions of Ukraine and Russia differ significantly. Zelensky noted that in the areas from which the Russians are demanding the withdrawal of Ukrainian troops, about 300,000 people live, many of whom have suffered from the fighting. Therefore, this issue cannot be considered formally or purely politically. He also confirmed that the peace plan of 20 points, coordinated with the United States, is about 90% agreed upon. Two issues remain unresolved, the key one being the question of territories.
When I said 90%, that's true. There is only one main issue where we have different views: territories. And these disagreements are not with the Americans, but with the Russians. The United States understands the positions of both sides and is trying to find compromise solutions. Over the past month, Ukraine has demonstrated steps aimed at advancing the peace process.
At the beginning of January, a meeting of the Coalition of the Willing Countries will take place in Paris. There, they plan to finalize the specific contribution of each country to the security guarantee system for Ukraine. French President Emmanuel Macron wrote about this on social media after the meeting between Presidents Volodymyr Zelensky and Donald Trump. More details and additional context about the reactions of European leaders to the recent talks in Florida will be shared by Radio Liberty's Brussels correspondent, Alina Abramovich.
The Western press writes that this time President Trump received Volodymyr Zelensky better than before, without a crowd of journalists behind the Ukrainian president, and with a focus specifically on negotiations, not on talking to the media. Politico writes that the meeting, quote, went quite well, at least by Trump standards. Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk called the security guarantees agreement a success. Overall, comments from leaders on social media are positive.
The success is the U.S. statement about participating in security guarantees, but we are still far from the final negotiations.
Significant progress has been made, which made us very happy.
We are making progress on the issue of security guarantees, which will be an essential element in building a just and lasting peace.
Macron also announced a meeting of the Coalition of the Willing at the beginning of January to finally agree on the specific contribution of each country. The security guarantees for Ukraine, which they plan to finalize there, should consist of 3 lines and provide for the presence of foreign troops in Ukraine, as well as commitments similar to Article 5 of the NATO Charter. This very point remains contentious in the matter of guarantees, since for Russia it is unacceptable. Analysts in Brussels insist. That is why they do not see significant progress in these negotiations and call the statements by Volodymyr Zelensky and the Europeans about progress a game for Trump.
He sounds optimistic about the agreement because it means that if Putin now says no, it won't be the fault of the Europeans or Ukrainians. Putin is doing exactly the same thing. He also tries to sound generally optimistic, while at the same time saying that there are still a few crucial issues we need to agree on. For example, regarding the root causes of the war, as he calls them. These are the real issues at stake.
By the way, there was no optimism coming from Berlin. Chancellor Merkel did not issue a statement on social media, and his press service reported that the German government welcomes President Trump's efforts to achieve a just and lasting peace in Ukraine, but there is a lack of willingness from the Russian side.
One thing is clear, ending the war depends entirely on Moscow. Without Russia, peace is impossible, and we definitely see a certain difference between what the Russian president supposedly says during conversations and what is announced publicly, or what happened again at Christmas in the form of attacks on Ukraine.
At the same time, analyst Roland Freudenstein emphasized that he is now more optimistic than he was at the end of November, when it seemed to him that the U.S. was about to abandon Ukraine and leave it to its fate. Back then, there was talk of a plan with 28 points, largely authored by Moscow. Now it's down to 20 points because the most unacceptable parts for Kyiv have been removed. For United News, Alina Abramovich, Marek Hayuk, Radio Liberty, Brussels.
Donald Trump responded to the so-called attack on Putin's residence during a press conference with the Israeli Prime Minister. He noted that he doesn't know anything about it, but will look into the circumstances. He also added that President Vladimir Putin personally informed him about this alleged attack during a phone conversation that took place on Monday. When asked whether the United States Intelligence Service has any relevant or supporting evidence regarding the incident, Trump replied that they are currently looking into it and investigating further.
No, I really don't know anything about it. I just heard about it. Now would be very unfortunate. You know who told me about it early this morning? Putin. He said he was attacked. That's not good. Don't forget, I stopped the supply of tomahawks. It's one thing to be aggressive, but it's another to attack his home. Now is not the time for such actions.
Let me remind you, earlier Volodymyr Zelensky called the claims about an alleged attack on Putin's residence a lie. According to him, the Russians didn't like the successful U.S.-Ukrainian meeting, and they're making up reasons to strike government buildings in Kyiv. The president reminded that Russia had already attacked the cabinet building with missiles in September and urged everyone to stay vigilant in the near future.